Hello, dear colleagues, dear speakers, online and offline, viewers of this recording. Ukrainian Crisis Media Center starts the briefing on reforms during the war, next steps and expectation. I would like to invite Olga Lymar, the Executive Director of the Reanimation Package of Reforms. I would like to give her the floor. Hello, colleagues. The year was a full-scale invasion year for Ukraine, and Ukraine has gained a candidacy to the European Union, and we are continuing to implement the reforms. So today we wanted to get back together to the RPR Coalition, and the colleagues represent the coalition, and Yaroslav is now a member of parliament, and I hope we are together in this. And we will discuss the reforms during the time of the full-scale invasion. I would like to present our speakers today, who will be both live in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and online. Yulia Kyrychenko, member of the board of the Center of Political and Legal Reforms and co-head of the RPR Coalition. Natalia Ligachova, the head of Coalition RPR, and Svitlana Kononchuk, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and Yaroslav Yurchyshyn, People's Deputy, Member of Parliament of Ukraine, and Deputy Head of the Parliamentary Committee on Anti-Corruption Policy. I would like to give the first floor to Mrs. Yulia Kyrychenko, and my question is, how is the pace of reforms ongoing due to the requirements on the Constitutional Court of Ukraine related to our commitments to the European Union? Thank you, Olga, and I'm glad we can discuss reforms during the time of the war, because this is another front line. We are going to succeed only if we win this one as well. And the declining empire, Russia, is fighting democratic Ukraine. Should we have had such a totalitarian regime as in Belarus, we wouldn't have this war, and we have no other choice than to win militarily and as a legal state. So the legal reform is not more important than the other reforms, but without it, we cannot undergo European integration and become a full-scale member of the EU and efficient and a strong country. And without it, we cannot survive alongside with the aggressive neighbor and the so-called Russian world. So we need to reconsider the situation related to the genocide of the Ukrainian people, and that's what the Russian population needs to do. And the Constitutional Court, based on the conclusion of the European Commission, together with the candidacy status, this one was extended to us. The first recommendation was to increase the capacity to form a professional and transparent court, and the recommendation was not new. So based on the international requirements, the best legal experts should occupy the positions in the Constitutional Court, and the most important is their ability to withstand the political pressure, being observed at all times from all the political parties and forces. And the judges should have a high moral standards of values, because otherwise politicians are going to find certain weak links of these legal specialists to press on them. So our recommendation was to decrease the political aspect in the nomination powers of the president and the parliament and the council of judges to form the court, and to switch to competitive selection in order to assess if the candidates who would like to become a judge are indeed professional and have high moral standards. And we as the civil society managed to include it into the requirements of the constitution to the judges of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. But after that, politicians have made every effort so that this mechanism is not envisaged. In 2016, it was proposed to include this in the constitutional norm, and then there were doubts that it will be too detailed and it will be clarified by a respective law, and it has not been done since 2016. And now we have to face the need to implement such a mechanism, and the parliament has already approved amendments to the law on Constitutional Court of Ukraine, envisaging competitive selection and forming the so-called advisory group of experts, assessing those requirements to the judges of the Constitutional Court. But I would like to stress that the final reading approved by the Venice Commission is different from the previous conclusion of the Venice Commission, and there are two key requirements. First, if the advisory group of experts considers the candidate inappropriate and not corresponding to the requirements of integrity or competence, so the subjects cannot assign such a specialist to the position of the Constitutional Court judge. And before that, it was possible. We as experts fully support this position of the Venice Commission. We cooperated with the experts so that this provision emerges. And since we have established a mechanism at the level of the state, the legal experts cannot be appointed if they're not compliant. So if we have a provision that you can become a judge only when you are 40, so the same should apply to general requirements that are far more important for Ukraine. And the second recommendation of the Venice Commission is that the composition of this advisory board of experts includes 3 members. De facto, 3 are international experts and 3 are delegated by Ukraine, the President, the Parliament, and the Council of Judges, who are the subjects for the formation of the Constitutional Court. And the Venice Commission says that for the transition period, we would need to favor international experts and add 1 more international expert, which would raise the probability that high moral values will prevail. For me, it's not so critical because the main thing, and I'm sure of it, is that our state can cope with it. It's just 6 years of the transitionary period, and upon the expiry of this transitionary period, the international expert community will hand over the right to nominate to the civil society. In particular, NGOs having worked for 5 years on constitutional aspects and prevention of corruption, and 2 will be delegated by the scientific and the educational communities. So the only thing is that it's some kind of a lobbyism, because the Academy of Legal Sciences somehow appeared there. It's not the subject to provide such a member, because we, together with the colleagues from the civil society, have never seen those scientists fighting for the integral and professional constitutional code. So this is about recommendation number 1, but we will not be limited to this. What is important in the parliament, working groups have started working on the parliamentary reform, which should be finalized. There are 4 bullet points to ensure the participation of the opposition and respective rights of the opposition to influence in the parliament this process. Of course, the political party having gained the majority will approve, but the opposition must have the rights to ensure its democratic participation in the parliamentary decision making. The second block is also important, related to questions on ethics of members of parliament and the status of members of parliament, because ethical behavior of the members of parliament, irrespective of the political structure they represent, justify the trust of the citizens of Ukraine to the parliament and democracy. As this combination, parliament and trust, and the trust to the MPs we have selected. Another one is improving the regulations of the Parliament of Ukraine, establishing the procedures that are appropriate for implementing the main functions of the Parliament, including the legislative one and the parliamentary control, which is still weak. And another one is related to the apparatus of the Supreme Council. We are aware that deputies often come for one, let's say, cadence, and the administrative staff have the institutional memory, so it needs to be improved. And I believe it should be singled out of the public service and effectively regulated, especially at the times of complicated crisis, because Parliament really requires expert support, especially for Euro integration, for the analysis of the directives and harmonization of the Ukrainian legislation with the EU legislation, the keys, and this requires significant intellectual and expert resources. Second, and what I would stress upon, is the fact that the parliament and parliamentarism will not be efficient without real political parties. We developed, for example, the procedures, but when we vote for political projects encompassing candidates for money, so this is not about high quality parliamentarism. We need to reform political parties and increase the regulatory role of the state in the activities of the political parties, urging them for internal democracy, so that inside political parties, based on their real advantages, members could be promoted to the governing bodies and having a political career and become an MP or local deputy from this political party because of their qualities and not their money. This will stimulate active citizens to be included into the political system, and we have proportionate system, so they will contribute through elected bodies like local councils and the parliament. Thank you. That was it on my side on the most important reforms that need to be either finalized or still started. Thank you. It's an important set of topics, and everybody will be working on it next year. And my next speaker is Natalia Ligachova, head of the civil society organization Detector Media, and she's the head of the coalition reanimation package of reform. Natalia this year was really important for the media sphere, and the draft law has been prepared for over 10 years. What do you see as the role of the media during such a war, providing us with high quality information?
Дякую. Вас не чути.
You are muted. Hello, I'm really glad to see all my colleagues. Greetings to everybody. Regarding reforms, this year, media and the law on media, civil society organizations in their totality supported the approval of this draft law. It has not been yet signed by the president, so we are looking forward to seeing it. It has been discussed for some time. There were a lot of discussions, and previously when there was voting, our organization did not support, for example, regulation of online media, but because we were really lucky to streamline this draft law with the 7 laws needed to be approved for gaining candidacy to the EU. Due to this, it was quite fast that the working group started to work on finding a compromise with the stakeholders, the civil society, the media, political forces and parties, and it turned out when you are looking for a compromise, you can find it also among opponents. And a lot of MPs voted for the draft law, though the norms on electoral processes and participation of the media in those processes and referenda was taken out because the civil society have received that, and it was about concealed promotion during elections, and this was a requirement of some of the political parties. One, to be precise. At the same time, we need to state why this draft law was important, and it's related to our obligations to streamline the Ukrainian legislation to the EU acquis. However, our deputies, our members of parliament, decided to add a lot of other norms, and it was opposed by many political forces and some civil society activists related to protection of the informational environment and regulation of online media. We would welcome at least the streamlining of the legislation to the European one. And we tried to make the position of the ruling party acceptable for all. And in the output, we have a more or less decent law, increasing the mandate of the National Council, because previously it was literally with hands tied in terms of regulation of the activities of the media. They could not even check the channels conducting Russian propaganda. And the Security Council decided on stopping the licenses of Medvedchuk's channels.
Ті подавали до суду, суд виграв.
Because the courts were disputed and the National Council could not have respective powers, and we welcome this. It needs regulation, and of course we support the liberalization of this regulation. So I guess the National Council cannot block websites without the resolution of the court if they're registered, and only if they're not registered internet media, then they can block the website for 2 weeks. And we know that if somebody is afraid to register, the opposition thinks it's about their website, but nevertheless they can register. So I think that countering, garbage news is also important. And I hope this legislation will not apply to bloggers, because this would be too much.
Дуже важливо, що
Also, it is very important that in this reading, all the quoting norms were retained, and this was a strong point for all the civil society organizations and political parties. So to put it briefly, we welcome the adoption of this law, and we are looking forward for President signing it, though much needs to be done. It's also co-regulation, and it defines online media. The National Council, together with the civil society organization, should work on it. So this is just the beginning of this second process, the implementation of this law. I hope if we get the president to sign it, we will continue working on the quality of this law to be enforced. And related to other topics, of course, and know-how having emerged during the war. This was the United Marathon, Media Marathon, and it was very positive at the beginning of the war when oligarch-owned channels and state-owned channels and public broadcasters have united their voices and started broadcasting together. Currently, there are a lot of complaints because it's governed by the state, and during the war, I think it's justified, but the absence of pluralism and eliminating TV channels owned by the former president Petro Poroshenko, Espresso, and the Fifth Channel and Prямый channel, who was influencing the editorial policy of those channels. This led to the fact that in the TV informational society, there seems to be sort of a lack of political pluralism. I don't think that it should be about politics during the war. During the war, we must act as one. And besides political rivalry, there could be some discussional questions which would need to be discussed in the informational environment, and we should pay the dues to our state that even at the times of war, pluralism has been retained in our informational ecosystem. We have a lot of websites, and we have a lot of Telegram channels. I'm personally sorry that this platform became the basic one for Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government, because we know who owns it, and we are aware that it's vulnerable to manipulations because it is not regulated and is not publicly communicating with the regulators, media communities, and civil society, which makes the bigger platforms like Facebook and Twitter more transparent. But anyway, some dialogue is in place. But Telegram is now the main source of information for many Ukrainians and the government. So this pluralism is indeed present in the informational ecosystem, and the opinion of civil society organization is that the single marathon should be weakened, and the government, on the contrary, thinks it should be continued till the end of war. What is worrying us, let's say, is that we have a lot of state broadcasters. So Rada is now not a parliamentary channel, but part of the marathon, and they are the headliner of the marathon. One state channel is presiding the whole bunch of channels, and we know that the marathon production, or it's complicated to say, started to reformat Akhmetov's channels, who were reformatted after the adoption of the law on oligarchs. After that, Rinat Akhmetov closed all his media resources, and seemingly the employees created a production which was part of the marathon, and we are aware that this is not possible without cooperating with the government. So enhanced positions of the government in the informational sphere might be a bit justified, and at the same time we should be aware of the risks on access to information, not alternative information but pluralistic information. And we can see that PR is shared through Мы Ukraina, the TV marathon, and Rada TV channel, and there are attempts to create other state resources, so we need to keep track of that and track the state channels, especially the new ones, and track how the management is conducted in terms of the available state channels. We have the DOM TV channel, which was a part of broadcasting for the occupied territories. Now the audience is not quite clear, but it's developing. There are new projects and programs, and it's also state-owned. And we know that we have this Freedom Channel
себе перш за все як
positioning itself as a channel broadcasting for Russian citizens so that they receive information all over the world, and in some way it can influence their, let's say, mentality. The experts have some reservations about our TV channel being able to influence the Russian audience. At the same time, our broadcasting in foreign languages is quite weak. It's usually in the social networks, in YouTube. This is another challenge. So we think that broadcasting in foreign languages like English should be enhanced and not just focusing on Russian broadcasting. Also, it's important to track what happens to the public broadcaster. They have enhanced their positions during the war. They're part of the marathon, and it's very good because they remain a broadcaster that would best cope with, let's say, adhering to journalism standards, though our monitors have certain questions. However, it is a headliner on the quality. However, we are aware that budgets have been changed during the war. In particular, the public broadcaster, since the beginning of their creation in 2017, they have never received complete funding from the state, though its funding was envisaged by the law, but the state always found an excuse to cut this funding, and now this funding was again cut, and the public broadcaster has problems. They are filling the gaps due to Western donors, and now there have been signals on enhanced support of the public broadcasting from the Western partners. I hope they will get those funds. And I think that we need to push the state a little bit so that they do not decrease the funding of the public broadcaster, and find a way to strengthen it, because it's also radio, and radio has become a very important element of the informational security and raising awareness on what is going on in Ukraine, especially in the regions situated near the front line or occupied territories. And we're aware that many deoccupied territories were in the informational vacuum. The only information channel was the radio working on accumulators, and usually it was Ukrainian radio, which is part of the public broadcasting. So to sum up, the law on media and the civil society organizations support this law is expecting the signature by the president. We will cooperate with the National Council and political forces, the members of parliament and the experts on the implementation of this law, and we support the initiative of the political forces to introduce a draft law on media during elections. This should be supported in all respects. We will see how the text looks like, but from what was envisaged in the draft law on media was quite decent and positive for the media. We will support it as well, and we will keep track on non-enhancement of the state's power over the informational environment, and we need to prevent the use of the state resource for the PR of the government, not even politicians. And in particular in the Rada channel. So we need to keep track of the state, though at the time of war, we are aware that the state has all the mandate to control information. And we need to keep track of the public broadcaster so that they do not lose their funding, or probably the state would find the money to enhance the contribution of the public broadcaster, being a very important element, in particular, of informational safety. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia, for outlining the successes and threats in the media sphere. Please stay with us. And I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Svitlana Kononchuk, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Independent Center for Political Studies, a member of the RPR Coalition Board. Please respect your timing of 10-15 minutes. I think, Svitlana, in 2022, the civil society, in spite of the complications, has gained their second breath in assisting our army, etc. Please tell us about the role of the civil society in countering the aggression. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, dear colleagues, for the opportunity to conduct such a useful event. And thank you to those who have sacrificed very much to defend our state and freedom, giving us the possibility to work and promote those values that are important both for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian state and the partners of Ukraine worldwide. I would like to say a couple of words that I think are important for us to promote reforms. The colleagues have already mentioned it. Yulia and Natalia spoke about the conditions in which the civil society is working in today. And one of the conditions is the ability to receive information. In order for the reforms to be successful, and they, as we see, are evolving, the society must have access to information. And this is a big challenge. Everybody who would like to work now is facing. Since February, a lot of data was closed, unofficial information was limited in access, and over 1,000 of open data we could use were cut off. And during the year, there have been discussions on how to restore access to those data sets and when it should happen. There have been a lot of discussions by different organizations involving the Ministry of Digital Transformation and representatives of different ministries and local government. And everybody share this concern with access to information. At the same time, we unfortunately do not have the progress that would enable us to say that some data can be opened. And in this respect, we share the concerns arising due to the fact that some data may contain information about infrastructure or some things at the level of the local self-government, for example.
Там техніки прибиральної. І
like where some equipment is based, and access to the data is a risk in terms of security and national security in principle. Therefore, we are talking about, on behalf of our organization and from the project Civil Society Freedoms and National Safety, we are talking about the balance of security and transparency, and we are supported by the USAID. We are looking for answers how we can achieve this balance, and there is such a vision shared by many players who suffer from absence of information, that we must go over to the audit of the data available to subjects managing the data, and actively reconsider the data in order to resolve on which data sets should be public and which for the period of the martial law or subsequent period should not be made public. In any case, this process should be reactivated, and we need to provide this impetus so that the information that used to be accessible before the war could be restored, and those working with the reforms could have an understanding on what is going on. We are aware about the huge corruptional risks arising due to the limitation of access to information, or when the manager of information can deny the access to information. I'm not saying about open access, but about the requests for public information. So very often information managers are denying access because they are worried that some information can be used against public safety. But in any way, we need to make a decision according to clear regulations on what information should be open, what information should be not open. And probably what information should be classified. There are certain legal instruments, but we don't have a joint will to manage this important question. So success of the reforms without access to public data is a bit of an illusion. And I would urge all the involved in the reforms to keep track of this matter on access to information. The second aspect I wanted to mention in the context of countering Russia's aggression, and which was the topic of our organization, is assistance to the civil society sector as such. A lot of work within the project initiative of the sectoral support of the civil society in Ukraine is being implemented due to the support of the USAID, together with partners Center for Democracy and the Rule of Law and Center Jednania. We can see significant progress in the support of the volunteer movement and support to those organizations who are currently relocating, support to those who would like to register such organizations at the time of war, and there are certain administrative complications due to occupation, seeking a new location, banks. They can use our hotline to receive assistance. There is the phone number on our website. They will be provided with assistance aimed at sustainability of the entire sector. And you can always count on the help from those who have been working in the domain related to legislative regulation of various aspects important for the activities of the civil society. And aspect number 3 I wanted to share with you, and in continuation of what Natalia has said in the context of countering informational threats, we can see the complications our state is facing to counter those destructive narratives influencing the dignity of the nation, starting from the slogan about Ukrainians of three swords. We were wondering why such narratives are allowed in spite of their disruptive effect on the Ukrainian society. And we are aware that such destructive narratives are part of the propaganda, which is in turn part of war waged against the Ukrainian democracy. And we are working on such an instrument that would enable us to reveal concealed discourses, carrying those threats for the public safety, for the unity of the nation, and for the human rights. And we hope that this technology for analysis of the discourse as a construction or set of rules that are implicit to deliver certain narratives on Ukraine. We hope that this technology will be very useful for the regulatory bodies that can use our deliverables to assess those perilous discourses and have more motivated stance to go to court, so that the court could have arguments on the existence of such discourse shared by certain printed or electronic media, and then the state would not be obliged to resort to sanctions against the owner in order to stop the disruptive and manipulative discourses that are a systemic informational aggression against Ukraine and its society. So that's what we are doing now in order to strengthen our country and for being able to make use of the advantages of freedoms on which the strong society should be built upon, and Ukraine can become a very reliable partner for the EU countries now assisting Ukraine. I'm grateful to the organizations of the reanimation package of reforms for their significant contribution to our country's sustainability, ability to implement the obligations as a candidate to the EU. I wish everybody a victory and success. Thank you, Svitlana, and thank you for discussing not just how the civil society helps the others, but about the needs of the civil society. And I think that after our victory, we're going to analyze its role in the advancement of reforms and victory. And I give the floor to Yulia Moriy, Director of the Legal 100 Civil Society Organization. I'm happy that this organization is a member of the coalition. Our war has been in place since 2014, but 2022 has highlighted many more problems. Can you tell us what is needed to our servicemen? What does the state have to do to speed up our victory? Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Thank you, Olga. It's indeed a key problem. The war has highlighted a lot of challenges, and the attention to military men and veterans is really high. We're trying to deliver the message to representatives of the government that we need to give attention to the veterans. And I have prepared a short presentation, if I may, if you can see it. I will be very brief. The positive aspects, a lot of positive stuff was adopted for the protection of the servicemen and veterans. I will not go into much detail, but it's increasing the payment and provision of vacations. So recently, we're still waiting for this law to be signed, but recently it was adopted. Regulation of the procedure for service by foreign citizens, and it was a consensus of the parliament and the president. However, there are a number of resolutions that have aggravated the position of the veterans and servicemen. And I would like to remind the situation with the territorial defense, when the concept of territorial defense was totally distorted. It is clear that they cannot count on some legal certainty, because the key principles are changing very rapidly. Also, cancellation of average salary was part of this, and also the last but not least, that's increasing criminal liability. And we are aware that this is evoking a very serious counteraction from the society as undermining the trust to supervisors. I would like to go in more detail about the problems we are facing. I'm not opening any secrets when I tell that the quality of the laws is really low, but it impacts the people who are addressing us for help. So it was important to broaden the grounds for postponement of military service. But, for example, the disability of a parent was provided to postpone the call for military service, so postpone the draft, and this seriously endangers the security situation. But this was a position of the head of the committee to gain some political bonus, and we have stressed on it, and now it serves as an example on what the military draftsmen are trying to do in order to avoid this. So the first paragraphs include this provision, but the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, is of primary value, and the core intention was to protect the caretakers of disabled people. Therefore, this leads to a distortion in practices, non-transparency of the development process, and unpredictability of the lawmaking process. Regulation of many procedures by internal regulations, by telegrams. For example, 15 million paid to the families of the deceased. The list of documents to be provided to receive this one-time assistance are regulated by a telegram not by a legal act. I cannot see anything secret in the sample of the application and the list of documents, and this complicates the position of the families. And such examples are quite a few. For example, the list of prerequisites to assign the bonus on the first line. And last but not least is accessibility of orders and other bylaws. And due to the fact that army has appeared in the life of certain people very rapidly and respective processes as well. And there was a regulation or order of the Ministry of Defense, but based on this, people were out of obligation of military service, but they could not go abroad. So the text of the order was not provided. Before we understood that it's in the archive of the Ministry of Defense. We received special permission. And when we came, the archive employees were watching us so that we do not copy or take pictures of this order, because for copying you need to receive a separate permission, and this is not a secret order. It's just in the archive of the Ministry of Defense, and this procedure took about 3 months to provide compensation to the people according to this order. I would say people who are partially incompliant with the physical requirements must undergo a repeated medical commission. In spite of all those problems, with the adoption of legislative amendments and procedures, we think that the core problems are with the implementation of laws. We do not have major, let's say, legal surprises. So the core problems are about the implementation of laws and how do we efficiently ensure their implementation. I would like to say that the work of the state is viewed through the prism of our priorities, and it's the provision of legal assistance to the veterans. We take part in many other projects, but we provide legal assistance. And we have processed about 25,000 of applications, and they are a justification of systemic problems. I would like to say that violation of the mobilization procedure has about 500 applications. Inexperience or low quality of medical commissions, ignoring the justification for postponing the draft. usual legal instruments are not working. And we had to react very fast, because in a day or two, the person would go to the front line. And those procedures are regulated. So enhancement of documents in this case is not needed, but violations should be eliminated and legal protection ensured. I would like to very briefly say that we maintain statistics, and you can even discover some trends in terms of tensions both in the army and among the civilians. A lot of civilians also ask us about the possibility to go to the army. There are also people who would like to know about the rules for border crossing. I beg your pardon, probably it's too small to read. In April, the top question was the procedure for mobilization and the martial law regime. Now, it's the opposite. So resigning military medical commission for resigning. And respectively, if not today, very soon we're going to face the problem what to do with people in the army and study real reasons why people would like to leave the armed forces. In view of the above, I would like to say that we support the state and we have a number of proposals. First and foremost, creating an acting and prompt mechanism to react to complaints of the military men. We have a lot of instruments, but in this context, it should be very rapid and efficient in order to ensure protection of human rights. And taking into account the strengthening of liability for military men. And we can see a lot of initiatives to enhance liability in terms of military service. For example, the draft law envisaging that the commander can shoot his subordinates. We need to enhance control over the rights of the people. And secondly, is the provision of priority categories, especially family members, with all kinds of supervision, legal, psychological, etc., because a person, when they find themselves in the new conditions, they need to adapt to life without their parent. They face bureaucratic mechanisms that are difficult even for us as lawyers. So ordinary people cannot cope. So it's important, but though it's not on the agenda today, we need to also get ready for resignation of the mobilized and the transitional period from military life to civilian life, and there should be a mechanism we work on, and the Ministry of the Veterans is doing that, though we need some reservations. In terms of quality, we're not sure, because access to discussion is very limited for the civil society. And I think it should be a complex reform for the state support of the veterans, because the system active now with payments and the quantity of the veterans we are going to receive, the state is not going to cope. And the approach should be a systematic one, not just some benefits, I would like to remind why we expect a lot of veterans, due to the fact that certain legal acts were changed, like Decree 413, regulating the procedure of receiving the status of veteran, limiting no timing for receiving the status of warfare participant. For example, if a person participated for 1 day, it has they have the right to receive such right. Though at the time of the anti-terrorist operation, the so-called anti-terrorist operation, it was 30 days. Of course, we need to support the improvement of social protection of the former military. For example, the draft law enabling resignation for the servicemen who have been freed from captivity. So currently they must continue their military service unless the medical commission deems them unfit. So the draft law has been developed and it's in the pipeline. And also the question of the right to serve where the person is fit. So we had a lot of applications from people, professional military men over 60, wanted to protect the state, but they were rejected because the law limits the age with 60 years. But we have serious reservations about those reforms. So reforms should be based on transparency and respect to procedures, because the format in which legislative amendments are now approved raise questions about the quality and sensitivity of these reforms to the people. And we will not support such systemic changes unless we go back to transparency of the parliament and the other forms. Thank you very much. We will win. Thank you, Yulia. I think that everyone, or nearly everyone, has somebody at the front line. And these problems are very close to each of us. And we need to think how to help veterans and military men who are advancing our victory. Please stay with us. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yaroslav Yurchyshyn, Member of Parliament of Ukraine and first Deputy Head of the Committee on Anti-Corruption Policy. Mr. Yaroslav, as a Member of Parliament, please sum up on the impact of war, on the pace of reforms, and how the civil society can support the government and the parliament to advance reforms in the next year, especially when we are aware that a full-scale war is not going to end tomorrow and warfare shall prevail. Thank you very much to all of you who have created a certain phenomenon. Natalia Kononchuk, the executive director of the Center for Countering Corruption, was presenting at the International Forum in Washington, and she said that you can hardly find a country being at war and not stopping its progress to democracy. Of course, it's some generalization. A lot of democratic instruments that we have received starting from 2014 are now limited. And the access to registers was mentioned. Sometimes it's too regulated. Stopping the obligation to declare funds, and constitutional reform that has been postponed to after the war. This all indeed limits our resources. So should we consider the opportunities created by war? Unfortunately not. The war is taking our opportunities away. But we have no other opportunity for progressing. And I agree with Yulia that Ukraine will win over Russia. Ukraine will do it as a democratic country. And probably we need to win 2 times. First, to counter Russia, to win over Russia. And I would like to express my gratitude to volunteers and all those who support those on the front line. And then we should protect our victory. Unfortunately, we are stimulated in the direction of centralization. We can see it in a lot of processes, also including reforms in construction. For example, embodying in a draft law eliminating corruption, but it also centralizes the market and the creation of the Ministry of Reconstruction that consolidate the huge resources of the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Regional Policy. So such trends for centralization are sometimes logical. When Mrs. Natalia Ligachova was saying about the single marathon of national news, this is a logical step, but there is a question about the quality of the product and also representation of alternative positions, because if we analyze the materials provided by Detector Media, they're also members of the RPR package. It's easy to see how tempting this marathon is, not just for popularization of the narratives, but also like an instrument for PR and limiting competition. We can segment the work of the parliament that I represent, and of course we're not fully open because of the security issues, sometimes a bit too much, and probably the work of the parliament is not that obvious as the work of the president. We can segment the work of the parliament for this year into 2 stages. First of all, it's a warfare not far from Kiev that led to consolidation and approval of the necessary draft laws, sometimes not fully baked, but critical. And this period is until the beginning of summer of the current year, and after our military forces have driven the Russians out of the Kiev region, and we saw some political aspects reoccurring and some draft laws being realistically problematic for the implementation. And Yulia has described the situation that we have in the Constitutional Court and the selection when, let's say, European narratives are used to promote this solution that will not give a positive result. Therefore, during the war, reforms cannot be unfinished, but the only safeguard against failure of reforms is the consolidated position of our civil society sector, independent experts, and international partners. And it's quite complicated because if we analyze the civil society sector, it's very hard not to criticize our peers and our international partners see their mission in assisting Ukraine, but helping Ukraine not do their homework is very complicated. So it's always a dichotomy whether you should provide assistance against some incapable steps to achieve progress or help implement them properly. So at the time of war, we're balancing between critical positions and being silent. And when you go to your opponents with a proposal to improve before it goes public, but ultimately you understand that the result is not possible without bringing it to the public. But the phenomenon of Ukraine is that we're continuing quite ambitious reforms. And civil society attention is not always keeping track of it. Some very essential components drop out. For example, we accepted the law on media and omitted the critical component of regulation of media during the elections. So if we don't do that right away, we will continue to have some personalized issues of, for example, online platforms or TV broadcasting, so promoting certain persons. So in the new year, we will have to amend the law on selection to the Constitutional Court. We will improve the law on media in the sphere of electoral content, and we will for sure will go back to the independence and integrity of anti-corruption bodies, because we can see how the appointment of a full scale head of the anti-corruption prosecution office has impacted the entire picture. And we have the same problem with the chief prosecutor. So the Constitution does not prevent a competitive approach, but in the Constitution, this is not envisaged directly, and any president is promising to their voters that we're going to make a reform and competition, and after that they forget. So the Prosecutor General is a politically dependent figure, and when they have the mandate of the anti-corruptional prosecutor, many of the cases are, let's say, eliminated and so on and so forth. But the institution cannot depend on personalia. And if we analyze how much the prosecutor of anti-corruption prosecution's office is, how unprotected they are, and how the Prosecutor General can block cases against members of parliament. For example, in one of the cases, a civil society organization was suing the Prosecutor General for not opening the proceedings. So they should be given more organizational room or possibilities, and we have a full-scale manager at the moment, and when we elect a new one, and during the war, we will have to face the problematic that we will hardly be able to resolve. And going back to my professional specialization, I would like to say that we have to go back to declaring income. For the year 2021, submit all the declarations that have been postponed. And currently, there are a lot of opinions on losing this year and the mechanism of declaration as such. And most probably, all those steps will be supported by the motivation for our civil society to work, for our investigative journalists, etc. There is another critical component besides the parliamentary reform, because if we don't make our parliament more democratic and open and transparent, after the war it will be a smaller window of opportunity, and attention will be shifted to reconstruction, besides the need to further our regulation and the need to streamline them with the EU requirements and also NATO requirements in the field of security. We have some homework to do, and we should stimulate the international community to respect it on their side. And there is also an issue of confiscation of the Russian property and arrest of those agents who facilitated the full-scale aggression. The sanction group of Yermak and McFall have been created, and a lot of countries arrested significant Russian funds, but no funds have been transferred to Ukraine, which is not quite logical when we're talking about the scale of reparations that Russia must pay, and it can be happening now to strengthen safety at the expense of Russia and not Western taxpayers. And the Russians are the key reason that Putin launched a full-scale aggression of a part of against a part of Ukraine and occupation of it. Also, the same about Georgia and Moldova, etc. So we need to enhance our legislation and cooperate with international partners, so that our international partners are not afraid of the word sanctions, and it should be used very actively. Though there are no sovereign assets of the Federal Bank of Russia. There are foreign assets of sovereign debt of Russia in the amount of billions of euros in Europe. We have not pressed it enough this year, but we will have to, so that the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people and our military forces, etc., are not for vain. So we must win the war both at the front line and in the progress of reforms. And I would like to express my gratitude to reanimation package of reforms for keeping us in tonus, and I, as a representative of the minority, do not have the luxury to, counteract as opposition to the government. We need to be controllers, and we need not to be afraid to propose something which can be done in a better way. We should go out to the public and motivate the government to conduct adequate steps, because the price of quick solutions, like enhancing criminal liability for military men, I don't know if there were any lawyers behind those novelties and who convinced the chief of staff that such draconian measures are optimal, but we can see how a fast decision can raise public indignation and ruin our most valuable resource, our joint stance against the Russians. And could we have done it otherwise and regulate liability for deserting or alcohol abuse in the army? But it should be logical, and the civil society should have enough time to propose their vision and take it into account. Shall we lose time? Everyone is aware how precious it is, and then we would not have lost the trust, which is very expensive for the wartime. So we are going to win, and glory to Ukraine. Thank you very much. You have outlined several important topics. We will not be able to discuss them during even the next 2 hours, but we will work on them during the upcoming year. You have summed up a lot of tasks. I just want to give you like 30 seconds to say a couple of words about the top reforms to be implemented next year. That's, of course, approximation of our regulations to the EU acquis in order to respect the conditions for EU membership. In my domain, it's electronic declaration and enhanced independence of anti-corruption bodies and improving the procedure for selection to the Constitutional Court.
Порядку, пані Юлія Морій.
Yulia Moriy, the floor is yours. From our side, we deem it expedient on work on a streamlined and efficient mechanism for reacting to complaints from the military men, because we consider that there should be an independent non-military structure with real mandate. So any advisory councils under the president or the parliament are not working to provide real assistance to the people. Besides, preparation to resignation and return to civil life, reform of the state support for veterans to ensure systemic, realistic support, and probably that's it. Thank you very much. Svitlana Kononchuk. Thank you. I will probably reiterate the idea expressed in my previous presentation. I would much like in the coming year to go back to the possibility to receive information, operate it, and create it. And I would much have liked the state to play a leading role in this process, because without it, we cannot progress in this matter. Thank you. Natalia Ligachova. As I have just said, our core task after the president hopefully signs the law on media, we will be tasked with its implementation, and we should make sure that all the media ecosystem is involved and all the civil society organizations without any exclusions. And I agree with Yurchyshyn regarding the need to work on introducing amendments to the law on media in the electoral processes. This is very important. Besides, we need to protect the informational environment from excessive state influence, and we will work on it very closely. The state should be respecting the red lines during the war. And last but not least is, of course, support to the civil society or public broadcaster. And there is a process going on related to systemic work with the military men and with the Ministry of Reintegration and other agencies on improvement of the situation with accreditation of the media on the occupied frontline territories.
Вітаємо ці кроки, які з обох боків зараз ідуть.
We welcome those steps from the government and the military and the media society, and should we improve the situation, should we make it, and this will be very important. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yulia Kyrychenko. Thank you. If I have 30 seconds, I will structure the in the following manner. So I believe in our victory next year. So the top priority in internal policy is the window of opportunity to conduct parliamentary reform and the reform of political parties. Regarding the Constitutional Court, probably not the approval of the procedure for the selection of the Constitutional Court judges, but at this moment we have 5 vacancies. It is important that the Parliament provides their candidates not based on political interest, and the Council of Judges should be also capable to provide 2 candidates. And after our victory, it is very important for internal policy to demonstrate democratic and parliamentary, both parliamentary and presidential elections, and finalize the constitutional reform in terms of decentralization and balancing all branches of power, establishing efficient governance. Thank you, dear speakers. We had a discussion on the implementation of reforms by the reanimation package of reforms. Thank you to the Armed Forces of Ukraine for protecting us.
Типу, кожному українцю, який
and to each Ukrainian advancing our victory, and the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center for